I have a question for David and Leland. I know that your stretch robot that you have is for specifically like warehouse situations. For any of the other robots you have, are they for a specific situation, or do you focus on finding a sector in the market that you think can help, or is it just like finding the robot that you think will suit to a specific situation?
Yeah, I mean, the stretch robot, interestingly, marked a big change for the company because it was the first time we produced a purpose-built robot for a very narrow thing. And the original version of that robot was a robot called Handle, which was like a really cool-looking ostrich-like robot that was like, would throw its mass around and turn on two wheels. But we made the decision, it was a much more Boston Dynamics branded lab research cool robot, but was much less practical for the situation. So it was like the first time the company like pivoted and said, hey, this, purpose trumps the coolness factor, basically.
And then to answer quickly, Spot essentially is right now running around different types of warehouses and just doing inspections, mostly.
Any more questions?
Hi, so I'm interested in how, this kind of noise in creativity and so on, and also I'm interested in neurodiversity and how different kind of neurodevelopmental profiles of the brain might relate to the kind of balance of creative thinking and executive function and so on, and how those patterns of kind of firing kind of maybe relate, if that's a coherent question.
So the question is whether there's variability in different brain regions that might account for differences between individuals. Yes. So we have a theory of depression that the lateral orbitofrontal cortex is more sensitive to non-reward. Not getting an expected reward makes you sad, okay? So there's a whole theory of depression that's based on that. We know that antidepressant drugs, SSRIs, decrease the connectivity and the activation to non-reward of lateral orbitofrontal cortex. Okay, so that's one difference. Another difference would be in schizophrenia. Thinking seems to be somewhat sort of associative in schizophrenia. One goes very easily from one idea to another. And so again, we have a theory of schizophrenia, of that aspect of schizophrenia, that relates to the depths of the basins of attraction. Perhaps, though, to make it just a little bit more general and interesting to each one of you, what's going to make you most creative? One of the things that seems to happen is that different individuals are creative at different times of the day. So we know that people who are introverts tend to be terribly good at doing things like attention tasks in the morning, and extroverts relatively better in the afternoon or evening. So the sort of advice one would have is, for each one of you, it may be important to select an appropriate environment and time of day in which the noise in your brain is at an optimal level. So it's making some fairly sensible jumps, not too wild ones, but so that it actually is jumping a bit. And just as a follow-up, which isn't quite as scientific, we're also working on people who are attracted by screen use, mobile phone use, and so on. And so that's one of the most awful things, I think, for creativity. One of the key things for creativity is to give your brain time to jump a little bit from one idea to another. And given it's a random process and mustn't occur too much, then you may need to give yourself a bit of time. So this is an argument when you have to write that brilliant new paper, to give yourself at least 24 hours to be thinking about it, so that your brain does have a chance to move in interesting new directions. So I could say a lot more, but I'll stop there.
Thanks very much. Just on that point, what role do you think like boredom plays in being creative? Because like now we have screens, essentially, we're no longer really bored a lot of the time. And, also, you have, when you're being creative, often there's that period of difficulty of you're sitting there, you can't come up with something like a writer's block, say, but you work through that to create something which is more meaningful. It takes a longer period of time. Often creative people nowadays feel like the desire to reach for their phone if they can't overcome that initial barrier. So why is it that there's that barrier, and why is it that we want to pick up the phone rather than just work through that?
So this high-energy landscape, this high-dimensional landscape that's our semantic network, needs to be of the appropriate shape. So say we want to create a wonderful new work of visual art, then a lot of experience and training in visual art will set us up so that we have reasonable representations towards which we can jump. So in other words, expertise in the area is one thing that will help. Now, about the sort of writer's block, I suppose one of the things that happens is that you gradually get priming of nodes. So that means that at first, a particular area that you haven't been thinking about for a bit may not have the different associative ideas, the small groups of neurons, nicely primed and active. If you keep thinking about it for a couple of days, then naturally what will happen, as we understand the brain, is that certain nodes will start talking to each other more. They have initially weak links, and then you're effectively primed, so that then you can make better jumps into a space. So that's another reason for giving yourself time to be creative. I suppose, I mean, having said all this about the human brain, that we could in future design this into AI so it wouldn't take as long.
All right, so we'll take one final question.
Thanks very much. I'm afraid it's to you again. So I don't have time. I'm really busy. I want you to strap something to my head to make me more creative. Is that something that you're envisaging, seriously?
Sorry, I didn't quite pick up what you want me to do to your head. Strap? Oh, strap something. Yes, right. Okay. Okay, so basically, there is an important point about deep brain stimulation, which has been mentioned here. So deep brain stimulation works best in a low-dimensional space. So if you have someone who's trying to move the limb correctly or walk correctly, it works then because you don't need so many electrodes in the brain to work just through 3 dimensions. Basically, things like memory and so on are high-dimensional spaces. We think the hippocampus can store 10,000 memories because it's got 10,000 synapses per neuron, which determines the memory capacity. So effectively, it would be difficult to strap something to your head that would get a high enough dimensionality to get interesting ideas in there. So my suggestion to you is throw your mobile phone away and give yourself time over a weekend or something to be writing a paper, and then to give yourself time to get creative ideas.
So just to add on that, so one of the things that we look at is, how do you balance out the sort of excitation and inhibition in your brain? So Edmund talked about inhibition as sort of damping things down. And actually what you might see, someone asked about neurodiversity earlier, what you might see is variability in the amount of inhibition that you find within the brain. So some people may well have the sort of a neurochemical sort of pattern that's actually suppressing down that sort of creativity, not constantly. So we wouldn't say, well, you've got levels of GABA which are stopping your brain being creative. But the sort of variability that you get within brains may well change how much your neurons are going to be noisy, and whether they will go over some threshold to make you have an idea. This is at a level that is very, very difficult to investigate in the human brain. our research uses MRI. We can measure levels of neurochemicals, which may at some point give us some idea how this varies. You know, they're different in people who have autism, people who are schizophrenic. You do see these differences in the levels of different neurochemicals. So there are questions that we may well be able to answer, but for now we'll rely on the models because I'm not sure we've got data to actually do that at the moment. At that point, I'm going to bring this session to a close. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you to all the speakers. It's been a great session.